Hujambo, Espresso Talk Today community. Welcome to the show. We're so glad that you are in the house today for this special show. So what is it? We have the legend, the incredible legend of John Henry. Today we'll have a great story reading. Storytelling, is so important in the Black community, and we brought this from our African roots. It's a great way to celebrate our culture and to keep our history alive. The John Henry story really tells the story of the larger African American experience. Ben Koponen is our wonderful storyteller, our wonderful griot today. So sit back, relax, grab an espresso or a cup of tea if you prefer, and enjoy the show. Asante Sana for showing up.
The incredible true legend of John Henry. An African-American man named John Henry was the hero of former slaves and the people who built the railroads. He was famous for his size, strength, and hard work. Railroads began to link the United States together in the 19th century. The railroads made it possible to travel from one side of the country to the other in less than a week. And before then, the same trip might have taken up to 6 months. Railroad companies employed thousands of workers to create the smooth, flat pathways required by trains. John Henry was perhaps the most famous worker. He was born an enslaved person in West Virginia in the southern United States. He was later freed following the Civil War and the passage of the 13th Amendment. John Henry then started to work for the railroads. This is his story. People still talk about the night John Henry was born. It was dark and cloudy. Then lightning lit up the sky. John Henry's birth was a big event. His parents showed him to everyone they met, and John Henry was the most powerful baby anybody had ever seen. He had thick arms, wide shoulders, and strong muscles. John Henry started growing when he was only 1 day old, and many people say he grew to be the strongest man who ever lived. John Henry grew up in a world that did not let children stay children for long, and one day, he was sitting on his father's knee. The boy picked up a small piece of steel and a workman's tool, a hammer. He looked at the two objects, then said, "A hammer will be the death of me." Before John Henry was 6 years old, he was carrying stones for workers building a nearby railroad. By the age of 10, he worked from early in the morning until late at night. Often, he would stop and listen to the sound of a train far away. He told his family, "I'm going to be a steel driver someday." Steel drivers helped create pathways for the railroad lines. These laborers had the job of cutting holes in the rock, and they did this by hitting thick steel drills or spikes in the rock with a metal hammer. By the time John Henry was a young man, he was one of the best steel drivers in the country. He could work for hours without missing a beat, and people said he worked so fast that his hammer moved like lightning. John Henry grew to stand almost 2 meters tall, or 6 feet. He weighed more than 90 kilos, and he had a deep and beautiful voice, and played an instrument called the banjo. John Henry married another steel driver, a woman named Polly Ann, and they had a son together. John Henry went to work as a steel driver for the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, also known as the C&O. The company asked him to lead workers on the project to extend the railroad into the Allegheny Mountains. The workers made good progress on the project until they started working near Big Bend Mountain in West Virginia. The company's workers said the mountain was too big to build a railroad around it. So, they were told that they had to force their drills through it. This meant creating a tunnel more than 1.5 kilometers long. The project required almost 1,000 laborers and lasted 3 years. Pay was low and the work was difficult. The workers had to breathe thick black smoke and dust. Hundreds of men became sick, and hundreds of men died. John Henry, of course, was the strongest and fastest man involved in the project. He used a hammer that weighed more than 15 pounds, and some people say he he was able to cut a path of 20 feet every day. That July was the hottest month ever in West Virginia. Many workers became tired and weak in the heat. John Henry was concerned that his friends might lose their jobs, so he picked up their hammers and began doing their work. One week, he did his own work and that of several other steel drivers. He worked day and night, rarely stopping to eat. The men thanked John Henry for his help. He just smiled and said, "A man ain't nothing but a man. He has just got to do his best." The extreme heat continued for weeks. One day, a salesman came to the work area with a new drilling machine powered by steam. He said it could drill holes faster than 12 men working together. The railroad company planned to buy the machine if it worked as well as the salesman did. The supervisor of the workers dismissed the salesman's claims. He said, "I have the best steel driver in the country. His name is John Henry, and he can beat more than 20 men working together." The salesman, of course, disputed the statements. He said the company could have the machine without cost if John Henry was faster. The supervisor called to John Henry. He said, "This man doesn't believe you can drill faster. How about a race?" John Henry looked at the machine and saw images of the future. He saw machines taking the place of America's best laborers. He saw himself and his friends unemployed and standing by a road asking for food. He saw men losing their families and their rights as human beings. So John Henry told the supervisor he would never let the machine take his job. His friends all cheered. However, John Henry's wife, Polly Ann, was not happy. "Competing against the machine will be the death of you," she said. "You have a wife and a child. If anything happens to you, we will never smile again." John Henry lifted his son into the air and he told his wife, "A man ain't nothing but a man, but a man always has to do his best. Tomorrow, I will take my hammer and drive that steel faster than any machine." On the day of the big event, many people came to Big Bend Mountain to watch. John Henry and the salesman stood side by side. Even early in the day, the sun was burning hot. The competition began. John Henry kissed his hammer and started working. At first, the steam-powered drill worked twice as fast as he did. Then, he started working with the hammer in each hand. He worked faster and faster. In the mountains, the heat and dust were so thick that most men would have trouble breathing. The crowd shouted as clouds of dust came from inside the mountain. The salesman was afraid when he heard what sounded like the mountain breaking. However, it was only the sound of John Henry at work. Polly Ann and her son cheered when the machine was pulled from the tunnel. It had broken down. Polly Ann urged John Henry to come out, but he kept working faster and faster. He dug deep into the darkness, hitting the steel so hard that his body began to fail him. He became weak. Then his heart burst. John Henry fell to the ground. There was a terrible silence. Polly Ann did not move because she knew what had happened. John Henry's blood spilled over the ground, but he still held one of the hammers. "I beat them," he said. His wife cried out, "Don't go, John Henry." "Bring me a cool drink of water," he said. Then he took his last breath. Friends carried his body from the mountain. They buried him near the house where he was born. Crowds went there after they heard about John Henry's death. Soon, the steam drill and other machines replaced the steel workers. Many laborers left their families looking for work, and they took anything that they could find. As they worked, some sang about John Henry, the powerful steel-driving man, the devoted husband and father, the great friend to the Black Freedmen, the visionary who fought for a better future for all people. The end.